He always believed criminals ended up behind bars because they deserved to be there, because every fall was the result of their own choices. Then one night, his life put him behind those same bars, surrounded by the very men he'd spent years judging. But the stories he heard behind those bars shattered his certainty in ways he never imagined. And what he did after that night changed their lives, and his forever. Hi, and welcome to Unveiled Whispers. Let's begin. Morning rush buzzed through Mark Alder's Diner Number 2, the kind of steady hum only a well-run place earned. Coffee steamed, plates clattered, and Mark moved behind the counter with the sharp, controlled focus of someone who didn't allow chaos in his world. The bell above the door chimed, and Derek Malone stepped inside. The same Derek who'd been arrested last year for trying to steal a power drill from Miller's Hardware. The story had circled the whole town. Mark hadn't forgotten a word of it. Derek kept his head down as he approached the counter, hands tucked into his sleeves. Mark's jaw tightened. "Jenna," he said quietly, "keep an eye on him." Jenna frowned. "Mark, Derek hasn't caused trouble since that one arrest. He pays, he eats, he leaves." Mark didn't budge. His expression stayed hard, carved into something long practiced. "One mistake isn't an accident," he said flatly. "It's a preview." Jenna looked at him, searching his face for even a small softness. She didn't find any. A quiet moment stretched between them, and then Derek stepped up and ordered nothing more than a black coffee. He placed a few wrinkled bills on the counter and offered a polite nod before finding a seat near the window. But Mark watched him with the same cold certainty he reserved for anyone with a record. "People don't just end up behind bars," he muttered under his breath. "They walk themselves there." He straightened the receipts beside the register, aligning the edges with practiced precision. In his world, discipline meant order, and people who lacked it, they ended up like Derek, exactly where their choices had taken them. To Mark, it was simple. Criminals were criminals. Excuses were excuses. Nothing in his life had ever convinced him otherwise. Mark stepped back behind the counter, wiping his palms on a towel, as the diner settled into its late morning rhythm. But beneath the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation, the same belief sat in him like bedrock, unchallenged, unshakable. Because Mark Alder's life had taught him only one way to understand struggle. He didn't come from success. He came from a 2-room rental behind an old textile mill, where survival meant working harder than your own bones could handle. His father left for the factory before sunrise and came home after dark, hands trembling as he ate dinner in his work clothes. His mother folded laundry at a dry cleaner until her knuckles swelled. They were never lazy, just worn down. His father's heart failed at 55. His mother followed a few years later, her body simply giving up after decades of labor. And young Mark learned a lesson he carved into his identity. If you don't outwork everyone, life will crush you. So he outworked everyone. At 17, he held 3 jobs. At 23, he bought a failing roadside diner and slept in the storage room for 6 months while he rebuilt it, scraping grease off old walls, repainting at midnight, cooking until his arms went numb. Customers never saw the blisters. Employees never saw the exhaustion. He hid everything behind discipline and a hardened exterior. By 41, he owned 4 diners, 3 paid-off vans, and a home where his wife and kids never had to worry. To Mark, every success he had was earned, and every failure he saw in others was proof they hadn't tried hard enough. His past hadn't just shaped his worldview, it cemented it, a worldview with no room left for sympathy. The morning crowd began to thin, leaving the diner in a quieter rhythm. Mark checked the time, jaw tightening. Luis, his newest line cook, was 20 minutes late for his shift. When the kitchen door finally swung open, Luis hurried in, breathless. "Sorry, Mark. My mom had a doctor's appointment and—" Mark cut him off with a raised hand. "Everyone has something. Life doesn't pause for excuses. If you want to keep this job, show up on time." Luis lowered his eyes, nodding, though his shoulders stayed tense. Jenna watched from the drink station. "He's trying," she murmured. Mark didn't respond. He was already stacking invoices into perfect alignment. In his mind, the rule was simple. People choose discipline, or they choose failure. And he believed that more deeply than ever, right before the moment life would test that belief. Hours later, as the first stretch of evening settled over the diner, Mark stepped outside for a quick break. He slid into his SUV, planning to check in on diner number 3 before heading home. He didn't make it 2 blocks. Flashing lights appeared in his mirror. Mark pulled over, confused but calm. The officer approached. "Sir, license and registration?" Mark handed them over. The officer's brow tightened. "Mr. Alder, your license is suspended." Mark blinked. "Suspended? That's impossible." "There's an unpaid traffic citation from 3 months ago." Mark exhaled sharply. "I paid that. According to the system, you didn't," the officer replied. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Annoyance flared. "Come on, officer. I run 4 businesses. I don't have time for clerical mistakes." The officer stiffened. "Sir, step out of the vehicle now." Mark hesitated, long enough to irritate the officer, not long enough to realize the mistake. He stepped out, muttering just loud enough for the officer to hear, "Ridiculous bureaucracy. Unbelievable." The officer's expression snapped into something colder. He called it non-compliance. Before Mark fully understood how, he was in cuffs, frustration boiling hotter than fear. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't even careless, just unlucky. And yet, for one night, he would sit behind the same bars as the people he judged every day. Processing didn't take long. Mark's ID was checked, his belongings locked away, and an officer informed him, in a flat, bored tone, that he'd spend the night in holding until the courthouse opened. Before he could argue, a metal door buzzed. "Cell 3, step inside," the guard said. Mark walked in, and the door clanged shut behind him. 3 men looked up. One sat on the lower bunk, tattooed forearms resting on his knees. Another leaned against the wall, a thin scar running along his jaw. The third, younger, sat quietly on the bench, eyes tired but alert. Mark's stomach tightened. Exactly the type of men he always warned his staff about. That was his first thought, sharp, automatic, unfiltered. The 3 prisoners watched him with mild curiosity. Mark stood stiffly near the door, pretending he wasn't out of place. Pretending he wasn't judging them. Pretending he wasn't scared. He had no idea that before the night was over, these same men would tear his beliefs apart. The cell fell into a hush that felt thicker than the concrete walls. Fluorescent light hummed above. The metal bench was cold beneath Mark's palms. He kept his back to the cinder block, pretending to study the room, but his heart had the unfamiliar, tight flutter of someone who'd just been stripped of certainty. A soft chuckle broke the quiet. The youngest of the 3, a man in his early 30s with a slow, careful manner, looked up first. He had a child's drawing folded into his palm, corners worn. "You first time?" he asked, not unkindly. His voice had the flat habit of someone who'd learned to keep trouble small. Mark blinked. "Yeah, overnight." The man nodded toward the bench. "Sit, I'm Ethan." Mark sat, awkward, aware of the eyes on him. Ethan's gaze was steady. It held something like ordinary grief. "So, what you in for?" Ethan asked after a beat. Mark told him, suspended license, unpaid ticket, an argument with an officer. He kept it clipped because talking felt like confessing. Ethan listened, head tilted. When Mark finished, Ethan rubbed the child's drawing between thumb and forefinger and spoke softly as if he'd been rehearsing the words in his head for months. "My son has asthma," Ethan said. "He's 8. Used to be fine till last winter. Insurance changed. My hours got cut. The inhaler they gave him costs more than rent some months. We tried clinics, assistants. There's always a wait, always paperwork." One night he woke, gasping. I panicked. I went to the pharmacy. Card declined. Told them I'd be back. They called the police on me for taking it. I didn't steal to hurt anyone. I stole because I thought I might lose him if I didn't. He swallowed. "I thought I'd pay it back. I thought I'd make it right. Instead, I got cuffs. My boy, he's with his neighbor now. They told me the judge could be harsh when theft shows up on a record." Mark found himself listening with a kind of stunned silence. The carefully measured voice of policy he'd carried all his life. Work hard, be responsible, pay your dues, felt thin next to Ethan's worn explanation. He had seen customers count coins, seen parents with tired eyes, judged them as slackers. Ethan's words landed in his chest like a small, sharp stone. "How old is he?" Mark asked before he caught himself. 8, Ethan said. "He draws a lot, says he's making me a superhero." Mark's throat tightened. He hadn't meant to ask. He hadn't meant to show interest. When you ran a business, you practiced distance. But that drawing, folded and soft, made something inside him loosen. Raphael was silent until Ethan finished. He had been leaning against the wall, jaw clenched, hands wrapped around his knees. He looked older than his years, lines of fatigue mapped across his face. When Raphael spoke, it was without the softness Ethan had shown. The anger in his voice was quiet and chipped, a slow, burning thing. "My wife. She gambled," Raphael said. "She did it on the sly at first. Then it got worse. I didn't know. She handled the bills. I trusted her. One day, the letters started coming. Loans in my name, heaps of them. When I went to the bank, they had notices. I thought maybe it was a mistake. I tried to fix it, called, begged for time, but the interest ate whatever room there was. I worked double shifts, tried to get a consolidation, but the debt kept growing. Then the collectors started filing. I got court dates I couldn't make sense of. I thought if I ignored it, maybe something would work out. It didn't. Warrant. I got picked up at a routine check." He let out a breath. "She left too. Vanished. I'm here because the system assumes the account name is the owner. It doesn't ask how it got there. I carry a drawing of my daughter in my wallet. I keep it because I can sleep on that face and pretend she's safe. I can't even call her long. They froze accounts." His voice broke on the last sentence and he stared at the floor. Mark felt a hot helplessness rise in him. He'd been thinking in terms of numbers, of ledgers and invoices. Now he heard about loans and cold courtrooms where the nuance of betrayal didn't matter. He had hired accountants, made decisions about other people's payroll. He understood papers. Yet Raphael's story revealed an edge of the system he'd never considered. How legal forms and signatures could destroy a life without asking who had done what. Leon was the last to speak. Older than Ethan and Raphael, he sat forward slowly, knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the bench. His jacket was worn thin at the elbows. A jagged scar ran from ear to jaw. He let the silence lengthen before he spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel. "I worked construction for 20 years, Leon said. "I climbed scaffolds, lugged steel, fixed things people didn't notice until they broke. Last spring, a beam gave way. I fell. Insurance told me it was pre-existing, and the boss said it was a shame, but there's not much we can do. I got a couple weeks of nothing. The medical bills came. I couldn't lift for months. Rent still due." His jaw tightened. One thing after another. Landlord put me out. I slept in my truck for a while, then behind a grocery store. I tried shelters. They full. I slept on crates. I woke up one morning and the manager called the cops. Trespassing. They booked me. Leon's voice did not ask for pity. It stated facts, one after another, until they stacked like bricks. "You can say people make choices," he said, meeting Mark's eyes, "but when everything collapses, when you can't move your arm and the bills keep coming, that choice is a deadline you can't meet. I kept thinking I'd get a job, that I'd fix it. Every time I thought that, another bill came." Mark's fingers curled on the bench. He could feel the texture of the metal under his palm, grounding him. Each story tightened around the same fact. Desperation did not look like laziness when you were inside it. When the three finished, the cell breathed as if it needed the exhale. No one raised their voice. No one sought pity. They simply told the small truths that had pushed them into trouble. Mark opened his mouth several times. Each time he closed it again. Words about judgment and consequence felt suddenly brittle. He found himself thinking of his father, hands raw from the factory, the quiet dinners, the promise Mark had made as a kid to never go back to that. How long have you been here?" he asked instead, voice softer than he would have expected. "Couple weeks," Ethan said. "Some of us longer. Nights move slow." Outside the cell, someone shouted the hour. In the dim corner where Mark sat, the three men fell into an easy conversation about the mundane, who had a job interview coming up, which charity mailed a form, whose mother needed meds. and the talk somehow made the space less like punishment and more like weather to be weathered. Mark listened, and with every sentence, the scaffolding of his old certainty came down a notch. He found himself measuring his own life against theirs. Choices he thought had been hard-earned discipline began to look like luck that had never once abandoned him. By the time the fluorescent light outside the cell changed from harsh to the dry tint of pre-dawn, Mark had stopped talking altogether. He lay back on the narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. The words of the three men turning over in his head like coins he'd never noticed were missing. Dawn would come soon. He had originally expected anger or indignation. Instead, he felt a soft, unfamiliar thing, the quiet burn of shame. When the first pale light seeped into the high window, Mark found that sleep would not come easily. The night had done what a night must sometimes do. It had shown him a truth he hadn't wanted to know. He sat in that quiet, heavy stillness for a long moment, gathering himself, before the guard finally unlocked the door and called his name. The officer returned his keys and ID with the same flat tone. "You're free to go. Court's open at 9. He stood for a long second in the doorway, the little metal card heavy in his palm. The three men inside watched him go, not with accusation, but with an economy of curiosity. Mark shouldered his jacket and left, but he did not drive away. He sat in his SUV and thought of Ethan's folded drawing, Raphael's bruised resignation, Leon's steady, defeat-stiff voice. The world outside the jail's bricks was the same, but the lines in his mind had shifted. He didn't announce anything. He moved quietly, like someone trying to undo a mistake without calling attention to the repair. That afternoon, he called the county clinic from his office between deliveries. He asked about assistance programs and explained he wanted to help someone who'd been held overnight. The nurse on the other end gave him a name, a sliding scale pharmacy that could set up 3 months' supply while they processed paperwork. He transferred the payment by phone. No fanfare, no photograph for the local paper. On day 2, he slipped a note through the jail intake line with his business card. "If Ethan wants work, tell him to meet me Monday." He did not ask for permission. He did not expect gratitude. He wanted only to close a hole he'd watched gape for a man who had worried for his child at night. When Ethan arrived Monday, nervous and careful, Mark showed him behind the pass where the hotline glowed and the heat smelled of oil and toast. "Start tomorrow," Mark said. "Morning shifts. Tell me what you need." He didn't lecture. He handed Ethan an apron and a schedule and the number for the pharmacy. Ethan's shoulders dropped as if a weight he had been carrying for months had been set down in a small, clean place. Over the next 48 hours, Mark rearranged the practical details of other people's lives. He paid a clerk at the courthouse to look up the file for Leon's trespass case. There was a small administrative fine and a notice he'd failed to appear. Mark covered the fee, but he did more than wire money. He wrote a note and left it with the clerk. "For Leon, I've covered this single step. Get him the paperwork he needs." The clerk nodded and slipped the note into the file. Mark didn't hang around to be thanked. Raphael's need was naughty. Mark had friends, a lawyer who balanced pro bono cases when she could, and he used one. He called quietly, explained a name and a few facts, and asked if she could look at signatures and loan documents. She didn't ask why. She just said she'd meet with the man and see what the record said. Mark left an envelope at the jail's front desk, with the lawyer's card and a brief instruction. "Call her," the envelope read. "Ask for help." Each act was small. An invoice paid, a message slipped through a window, a word on someone's file. But they were practical, immediate, and honest. He did not make speeches in his diner, did not tell his staff to watch as he walked money across town. When people asked how he'd decided, he told the truth in one sentence: "I listened." Word travels slowly even from a county jail. Over a week, Ethan completed his first shift, exhausted and triumphant. The pharmacy called to confirm the inhaler plan. A neighbor texted a photo of the boy asleep, the drawing clutched in his fist. Raphael's lawyer found evidence of forged documents and the phone calls his wife had used. It was not an instant victory, but it was a path. Leon got the clerk's confirmation that his fine had been paid and a list of shelter options. A foreman at a nearby shop offered day work after Mark vouched for him. Mark watched all of this from the kitchen's line, sleeves rolled to his elbows, palms reddened from work, and something simple and enormous settled down into him. The difference between judging based on what you see and understanding what people carry. He didn't tell the men he'd helped. He didn't need to. On a late Friday, as the sun lowered and the diner emptied, Ethan came in early and stood at the pass, hands folded like a student waiting for instruction. "You starting full-time next week?" Mark asked. Ethan looked at him, uncertain and grateful. "If you'll have me." Mark handed him a new apron. 7 a.m. sharp, learn the grill, we'll get you full hours in a month. Ethan's grin was small and fierce. Mark felt a warmth that was not pride so much as relief. A few days later, Raphael walked in to pick up a brown envelope from the manager's office, counseling paperwork, a yellowed letter from his lawyer. He looked when he realized Mark was the one who'd arranged the call. He stuck his hand out, unsure. Mark took the palm, gave it a short, steady shake. No speeches. When Leon came back weeks later for day work, he refused to be treated like a charity case. Mark showed him where the maintenance tools were and gave him keys to the back storeroom. "Keep the place running," Mark said. "Work when you can. We'll make room on the schedule." That was the change people noticed. Not a charity dinner or a mayoral nod. Not a plaque. Just people added into the fabric of daily work, recognized for what they could do rather than where they'd been. On his way home one evening, Mark stopped by the small thrift shop where Derek had once bought a jacket. The owner handed him a folded paper, Ethan's drawing, delivered with a note. "Thank you." Mark folded it into his wallet the way a person folds the truth into an account ledger. It was small. It was real. Standing in the quiet of the diner after the last customer left, Mark wiped tables with the same mechanical precision he always had. Only now his motions carried a different weight. The world hadn't changed. The rules he'd believed in still existed. But he had learned that life sometimes held no elegant choices, only hard days that required other people's hands. He thought of his father at the kitchen table, hands calloused and patient. "If you don't work harder than everyone else, life will crush you," he had promised himself. That promise had taught him discipline, and it had blinded him. Now he understood a second thing. Sometimes the work that mattered most was the work of noticing and helping. Before closing, he put Ethan's drawing on the bulletin board behind the register where the staff could see it. The line he'd been practicing to himself for years. People end up where their choices take them. Felt small and brittle under the morning light. He took down the drawing at last, and in the quiet, whispered something he had never said aloud before. People fall for 1,000 reasons. Sometimes all they need is a hand to pull them up. Then he locked the door, flipped the sign, and turned off the lights. As Mark stepped into the quiet night, he realized the world hadn't softened. He had. And sometimes that was enough to change someone else's fate. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that people carry battles we never see, then take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And if you want more stories that reveal the heart behind everyday people, subscribe. Every subscription helps this channel bring more meaningful stories to life.